So, yes.
I actually was able to see you speak in the city last year at a Media Bistro event.
Jolly good.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you were going to get into the 10 steps today.
Communicate? That would be the culmination of my speech. I'm, as I said, laying the foundations and the groundwork, the cornerstones at this point, to ascend higher in the edifice as we progress. Quite all right. And thank you for having returned after your first outing. Now, let us proceed to our examination of the means by which we can communicate. Say modern communication. Say modern communication. Now, many of you probably thought of something like this, a cellular telephone. I'm not sure whose this is, certainly not mine. I wouldn't have it in the house, personally. Disgusting thing. At least iPhones are shiny and can function as Aldous lamps, so I have wonderful applications on them, but this thing, it's quite pointless. And let's think about the word telephone. If we go back to the Greek, as one always must go back before one knows whither one is going forward, we get tele, pone, from the Greek. Tele, to a distance, pone for voice. Now, tele, also in its deeper root, is telos, which is the animating principle, the thing that is realized in whatever we see around us. So, properly speaking, a telephone, a telepone, ought to be the thing that brings voice to flower, that expresses all the potential in voice. That is, in fact, communication as Cicero was speaking of it before. Instead, what do we get? We get a torture device for our thumbs that gives us ROFL and IDK and WRU @ It's a debasement of communication, and it will not serve if you want to communicate effectively in the workplace. The email, which is... Yes, miss?
No, I agree with you on a level, sorry, I didn't introduce myself earlier, Maggie Grove, hands-on communications, and we really focus on, we're concerned about losing face-to-face interaction with our clients.
That's why you should be.
Right, but, so I agree with you on some level, but how do you avoid using technology, social media, you have to go to where the conversation is happening, right?
Communication ought to be a communion, a connection. And if one wants to connect with someone, one can't simply go to the person, the interlocutor, the audience. One must invite them to come towards one. So a proper form of communication, it must grow with the message. It must enter into the person and become a part of them. When one is given by a friend a glass of wine, it enters into one, and it suffuses one, it changes one. A good message should be like that glass of wine that strengthens the bond. Is that clear?
No.
How shall one say? Think of your American Indians. They communicated at ground level with a fire and a blanket, which gave no message. But when the fire and the blanket went up to make smoke signals, when that smoke changed and grew as it was sent out, it dominates the horizon and communicates with people for miles around. So the message changes without altering. We must have change without alteration. Do you understand? Change without alteration.
Okay.
Another question.
I'm sorry, just to piggyback on that.
Yes.
You need to, you're saying they communicated for miles, but what if we're trying to communicate to the other side of the globe, say Japan? I mean, you have to use computers or telephones for that, but I mean, like you said, smoke signals can go for a couple miles, but it's not going to reach Asia.
I'm afraid we might here have a failure of communication. When I was speaking of smoke signals, I was using them as a metaphor. I wasn't actually suggesting that you communicate with Japan via smoke signals. To extend the metaphor, think of a dinosaur. Think of a stegosaurus. It had a very small brain, but this tiny brain could control this massive creature, so that when a stegosaurus, your company for example, is beset by the Tyrannosaurus of the marketplace, the tiny signal of the stegosaurus brain can lash out the spiky tail and give it a tremendous wallop. Very good. Let's see, where was it? Ah, yes. You, miss. You'd be a good place to start here, as you have read my book, I take it.
Yes.
So, what can you tell me is the most inspirational part that you found of my method for communicating, the non-metaphorical method, the actual method of communicating, the 10 steps?
Well, I think that eye contact is really important.
Definitely, eye contact.
Eye contact, firm handshake. I am interested in the dominant dog theory. I'm a little confused about it, but if you could elaborate on that.
Well, certainly eye contact and a firm handshake are relating to how dogs communicate. They threaten via the eye, they approach, they feel each other out, and one in business can do that to establish a certain dominance. But if you think about dogs, and this is the development that I've made most recently to my theory, if you think about dogs, they don't merely look, they don't merely hear, and they don't merely touch, they also smell. And it is this discovery that I want to bring to my audiences now, after my latest realizations and researches into the field of business communication. For communicating via smell can give businessmen an insight unlike any other into their business environment. And I encourage you all to follow lessons of the dog theory and associate with your customers and your colleagues via smell. In fact, right now, this is a networking environment. I encourage you to smell your neighbors. It can be a bit awkward at first. Start with the basic dog theory. Introduce yourself, shake hands, make eye contact, and then progress to sniffing.
First.
Alas, I'm alone on the stage. Well, perhaps you will progress on to that when you read my book, which I highly recommend you do, because it is via the manipulation of smells that one comes truly to dominate the marketplace. This may seem like a strange notion, and you might wonder how I came upon it. I was in Thailand doing research on a sabbatical when I stumbled across a monastery in the jungle. It was very isolated, and the monks all abided under a strict vow of silence, except for the abbot, who was required to speak from time to time. But still, this incredible community of monks managed to survive, to farm the lands, to interact with the lay community around them, all without speaking. And it set me to wondering, how on earth could they do it? How could these people interact and survive in this frankly harsh environment without the power of speech?